So for today's topic, we are going to be making sense of the data that we collected. So the data collection plan worksheet that we had, where we were thinking about what kinds of data we were collecting in our session 5, how are we going to make sense of it? Our learning outcome and objectives for this session are as follows. For our outcome, we are building on your data collection plans. Participants will consider what kinds of information their methods are likely to yield and will feel prepared to make meaning out of that data using culturally responsive methods. Our objectives are participants will use the data collection plan worksheet to identify the types of data they will collect, explore approaches to analyzing data that keep culturally responsive and equitable evaluation practices at the forefront, and support visioning on the future of this evaluation for learning series.
Thank you, Sharzi. Okay, so yeah, we're going to analyzing data. And so I follow up with what approaches will you use in order to understand and ultimately use your data? And I'm going to start introducing analysis, meaning making. They're slightly different things, or they're different things that I think can be conflated. Also want to just raise the point that you can have quantitative and qualitative data types and quantitative and qualitative types of analysis. And so the data types, you can see this: quantitative numbers, values, qualitative narratives and recordings. And we talk about analysis. This is how we take these millions of numbers, quantitative, and put them into something that is reductionist and able to understand. That's a bite-sized enough piece that you're like, oh, that massive spreadsheet, that yields these averages or these graphs, stats, whatever. Qualitative, same thing. We've got mountains of transcripts. How do we put that into themes or codes that represent and help us make sense of all of those data? And one point that I just want to add is you can use quantitative analyses on qualitative data. And we'll pop into that one. You can go to the next. Okay, so when you're doing data analysis, I want you to keep these things in mind. First, and we've been talking about this a lot, your biases and your assumptions. So name them and do your best to mediate them. And so the first one I want to raise up are beliefs about measurement, objectivity versus subjectivity. And totally excited to have a theoretical discussion with folks tomorrow in the office hours if they want to. But from where I stand, you cannot have absolute objectivity, nor, this is the idea of post-positivism, absolute subjectivity. I can't think the sun isn't there and it just disappears, or at least as I understand my reality. So put that aside. It's also important to think about who the evaluation team members are, who is and who's not involved. That's just going to run through all of your everything that leads up to the data analysis and into the analysis. And then there's just bias in collection methods and instrumentation kind of thing. This instrument only picks up water quality in this, piece, right? Is it not it's like where you get it all like set up on the front end so it actually works, right? You get consistency. Or someone might just, answer a survey in a slightly different way or just respond in a different way. So it's respondent bias. It's really important to center your why. We talked about axiology, so your values when you're doing analysis, name them and know them. And I mentioned this analysis versus meaning making. So you're going to take raw data, you're going to move it to some key points. That's the analysis part, and then get to understanding. That's the meaning making. And we're going to stretch into meaning making today. And then, yeah, make sure your analysis answers your question. If your question is not about tabulating the number of people that did something, your analysis shouldn't necessarily be that. If you want to know, if your research question is knowing how the experience deeply felt for someone, numbers aren't going to get you that. Okay, you can go to the next. And I'll just add, if anyone has any questions, just stop and ask me, please. So a big misstep I just want to flag, because I see it all the time, is we get all these data and we're just too busy to use them. And let's not do that. If you're really busy, don't collect new data. use existing data. And I would offer that most of the time, there's probably existing data out there that can answer our questions. Okay, you can go to the next. Okay, so there's some big considerations with data analysis. And the first is around this idea of theming, grouping, or coding. This is often done with a qualitative approach, but you could apply a theme to qualitative data and take numbers of it. But anyways, what I want to point out is you could have different ways to theme or code data. And so you look at the first little figure, got a bunch of data in the middle, and you can say, oh, I'm going to put these all by this color, or I'm going to put them all by this shape. So how our codes are created are going to make a big difference in how we understand these data. Next, a really common thing with analysis is just visualization. We can make graphs, we can look at concept maps and how things relate to each other. Of course, a very common thing that we're all used to is numerical, stats, counting. Again, this type of approach can be used on quantitative and qualitative data. And I'll talk about some of those in a sec. This is often used to summarize things or to make inferences or even predictions about stuff. And then we often do comparisons over time or comparisons to some sort of reference. You can go to the next. Okay, so we showed you these types of data last time. I'm just going to give a couple examples of how to analyze these types of data and then pause and see if anyone wants to be brave and talk about ways that they might also be able to analyze these data, because I think we'll be okay with time. So document review, just looking at the first one. So I could count the number of times key concepts were discussed by students, and I could use oh yeah, and so I could use this theme quantitatively, right? How many times did I hear this vocabulary word or that vocabulary word? That's taking qualitative data and using it quantitatively. Also, I could use a predetermined theme to understand this phenomenon. So I'm looking at document reviews, kids' reflections, and I really want to understand how they understood ecological processes. And so I could have those processes and say, oh, I'm seeing that. Take the quotes, put it in there to really think about how they understood the phenomenon of learning about ecology. Also, and that was a predetermined theme, you could imagine if I allowed something to emerge. I was just combing through the data, trying to understand it, and I realized something totally off my radar was really important to the students. I start to see kids talking about introspection, fear, not ecological processes, and that would really tell me how they understood those lessons. Okay, sign-in sheets, right? This is a pretty easy one, but who attends, how long? This is, getting to counting, summarizing, and maybe even a geographic display. Or I could learn things about the folks who are in there and try to associate variables, right? So, oh, person with this particular role at outdoor school came this frequently, and this person in the other role came less frequently. And of course, often we disaggregate data by gender, race, and ethnicity. But of course, there's a lot of other ways to disaggregate and understand data. Does anyone want to try to say how they might analyze photos or art photos or art projects? Yes. And so both of those examples seem to be like a qualitative approach, and that's great. Though items that are included in the photos could imagine or change. Yes, no, does it change? Percentage of students that had some sort of change, or the number of times that they had an item in there that was a concept that we taught about in our class. So good. Okay. I'm gonna move on to the next. We also showed you these data collection methods, and I'm going to just tour a couple ways to analyze these data. So for observations, a quantitative approach might be to take our field notes from observation and just look at the counts for an observed action. let's say we're looking at students' collaboration. That's a outcome that's common in outdoor school, and then I measure with a survey. So you could weight those counts, right? You could say the number of students that I observed that collaborated, percentage, right? You could say, you could weight no collaboration, some collaboration, lots of collaboration, and just try to get a quantitative read on how well did students do that, or how frequently did students do that. And I say weighting because that would get you the quantity and quality, or the well and the frequency. Alternatively, you could do a thematic analysis of student interaction or student concert or conversation to understand how they experience working with each other, not how frequently, right? Or trying to weight it, just like, what does collaboration look like for students at outdoor school? Those will get you different things. And so again, your eval questions should be aligned to your data analysis. I'll go to surveys also because it's just a frequent one. So we look at teacher responses to the question about factors that promote or dissuade attendance, and I could put those in groups and tabulate them and make meaning from. That's just a thematic analysis. And I raise that one because we're going to do it in a minute. But yeah, I'll give another minute to see if folks have any things they want to add for how you might analyze interviews, focus groups, interactive and reflective activities, or surveys and observations. I've used the thermometer before, right? As a facilitator, just around agreement on a concept if something raises. And so that seems like it could be a way. If that's a piece that you want, you're going to want to track that all the way back to your methods. And when you're doing data collection, so that way you can like, oh, I'm hearing this, everyone, and then get a read on it. The way I've done focus groups, and Sharzi, I know you also have a bunch of experience with them, is that the group is the unit of analysis, and that you're not saying, oh, this person said this or this person said that, because the method doesn't allow for everyone to necessarily speak their truth. And so then you have to really think about, the unit is, I held one focus group, it had 8 people, but the focus group's statement were blank.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is I've always done focus groups where we've had a note taker who is making notes of what people are saying, but then someone who's doing participant observation, and they are paying attention to the behaviors of people in the group. So while folks are talking, like, is anybody showing any facial expressions that look like they disagree or they feel uncomfortable? And so they're also noting that. And then we talk about that. Sometimes the note taker will say, exactly what Stephen has said, like, I heard this out loud, but I'm seeing that some of you are making some motions with your body that looks like you don't necessarily agree, or maybe want to add something more. And so that's a way that we have, like, that we've utilized to actually bring out the fact that there's like, the group is not necessarily cohesive, and there are other opinions happening in the group. And one of the drawbacks of a focus group is that a lot of people like fall into the group think, where they will do whatever everybody else says, and like, how do you mitigate against that?
So qualitative ideas to analyze observation, who's talking, who's not, who's next to each other, how long are the parts of activities happening, and how long is set up versus actually doing the activity.
I have one other thought, because I was thinking about, like, sometimes my question might be about trying to understand the general feel of something, like sort of what generally is the vibe, or what generally is the experience. And other times I might have a question that's like, I want to understand the full range of experiences that kids are having. And so, like, whatever my question is, then will feed into how I collect those data. So as Stephen said, often a focus group, the idea isn't really to gather the full range of ways that people are thinking, because there isn't necessarily an equal opportunity for everyone to share their full thought process in that environment. And so that's just my brain, like wheels were kind of turning on that when you asked that question. So just thinking about like, what are those connections between what it is that we're trying to learn, the way that we're going to set up our data collection, and then how we're going to sort of set the parameters or approach how we analyze the data and then make meaning from that.